Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the second in our webinar series, Friends with Benefits. Really excited to have you along with us today. So this, for those of you that weren't available on the previous session, this is our new webinar series. We're running these every 2 or 3 weeks and inviting along one of the really exciting providers in the UK benefits space. Some actually beyond the UK as well, and learning from them and the evolution of benefits and how these great providers can support the employee base of our clients and prospects. So we're really excited today to be joined by Sarah from Apryl. So really got a really exciting session today. Certainly from my perspective, when I think about fertility, and obviously this is the world that Apryl live in, fertility is a topic that has hugely blown up in terms of employer support to employees over the last few years. 10 years ago, we weren't really talking about this, and I think it's really exciting now that we can talk about broader areas of support, really important, significant moments that matter in people's lives, and how we can, employers can support those employees through those times now as well. So yeah, really excited about today's session. In terms of introductions, the two of us today, so myself, Carl, so I head up the marketplace team at Ben. So my team ultimately, for those of you who don't know, split into 2 departments really. One is our benefit design team, and that's where we help our clients build amazing benefit strategies to sit on our platform. And the other half of that is our partnership team, where we get to work with amazing providers like Apryl, and how we partner those with our clients. And as I said, we're joined by Sarah Smith today, who's an account executive at Apryl. So Sarah, it'd be great if you could just do a brief introduction to yourself.
Hello, my name is Sarah, and I, as Carl said, I work for Apryl on the sales team. We are based out of London, although our head office is in Berlin, in Germany. We were just talking beforehand about the fun trips I get to do out to Berlin to see the Berlin team. As I will go into, Apryl is a fertility and family forming benefits provider, and I'm here today to talk to you about what that means for teams and employees.
Awesome, brilliant. So by way of an agenda, so we'll start off by covering who is Apryl. Is there an Apryl within Apryl? Who knows? The benefits to employees. So what do employees get out of this? Equally, what do employers get out of this as well? And then we'll leave some time at the end for some questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function in the bottom, and I will get to as many of those as possible. I won't pre-select the easy ones for Sarah, so put your challenging questions in, and as I said, we'll try and get to as many of those as possible.
To test me on a Thursday afternoon.
But yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to Sarah to talk us through today's presentation.
Fab. So who are we at Apryl? As we very briefly touched on, we are a fertility and family forming benefits provider. Originally started in Berlin, and we covered Europe, broadly speaking, but recently we've also been acquired by Progeny, who are a massive US firm. And that means that we've got a wealth of experience across Europe, LATAM, APAC, and now the US to provide support for employees from small companies all the way up to really big companies. And our whole company mission is that we believe that starting a family should be a right and not a privilege. And a little bit about sort of our why and what we're here to do to help people with is actually, and sometimes when I talk to people about being a fertility benefits provider, people say, is infertility that big an issue? Well, actually 1 in 6 people is impacted by infertility. That's more than depression, that's more than diabetes. And actually the more you start from working in this sphere or talking about it, you would be surprised as to how many people in your lives might be impacted by infertility and the desire to move into family forming. Equally, that number is just the medical diagnoses. So that's just the percentage of people who have had a medical diagnosis or have medically got infertility. But obviously, if you're in an LGBTQ relationship, or if you're trying to have start a family by yourself, you can try really hard, but without some kind of medical intervention, that's not going to happen. So we are here to support people on that family forming journey and help people with the very many different stages and steps that can look like. So the first part is, what are the benefits to your employees? What what are they actually going to get if they have Apryl as a platform? So we are a comprehensive fertility and family forming benefits platform that everyone can access. And if you rolled Apryl out to your employees, every single employee has access to the platform, which means that, you know, those people who might be a little bit embarrassed to first start talking about it, because unfortunately and incorrectly, there is an awful lot of shame associated with infertility. It's a very emotional topic for a lot of people. So this is a real safe space where people can log on, they can have a look, they can really get to know what they have on offer and what their options are. So speaking of knowing your options, there are three main strands to what we offer. The first is all about knowledge. The second is about sort of provision of services. And the third is part of our pro package, which is all about leveraging your budget and actually having an employer be able to contribute to the financial side of things. So, like I said, a lot of the time people are quite shy. They don't necessarily know where to start. So the Knowledge Centre is a place where they can go, they can log on, they can look through articles, and they really range because people's levels of knowledge vary and what people are looking for will be totally different. So it might be that they just want to learn a bit more about infertility or some tips on conception, or it might be a much more detailed nitty-gritty type. What are the differences between IVF and ICSI and IUI? What are the success rates? What's legal? All of those much more sort of the minutiae around things. And they can have a look through, they can read the articles, they can click through and find out the legislative landscape of their countries and what's happening. But beyond that, a lot of the time people want to speak to someone. So we also have access to our fantastic member care experts. So people can click through and book a consultation. And what that conversation looks like is going to be very, very different depending on the individual's circumstances. So whether it's someone who is thinking about starting a family and has some queries and questions, or it's someone who has been trying for 2 years and is desperate to get some sort of treatment, maybe IVF or whatever the pathway looks like. But that consultation is a proper in-depth conversation with a member of our care team to talk about what their options are, to provide some emotional support, but also to do some signposting. The navigator, so I've talked about being a global provider, and as I say, our recent acquisition means that we can also even cover the US, which is a totally different landscape. But you can click into your country and you can see, right, what is legal here? What are the different parameters? So are there any age restrictions? Are there any restrictions in terms of sexuality? So for example, in mainland Europe, you might live in Italy, and you might click in and be in a homosexual relationship looking to go through fertility treatments, and you'll click through and unfortunately find that that isn't an option for you in Italy. But perhaps you could look at other countries on mainland Europe and click through and see, okay, but I could fly to Germany, or I could go, to another country where this is legal. So you can have a look at the legislative landscape and what the restrictions are. There's also indicative costs on there. Now, as you know, with everything, the price of a pint in London is going to be different to the price of a pint in Yorkshire. So it's on a very much a country basis and gives an overview. But before you go on that journey, you can click through and see, okay, this is what it would cost to have egg freezing. This is what a year of storage would look like. So the Knowledge Centre really does give that overview. And as I say, any further detail or questions that any individuals have, they can have those conversations with the care team and say, look, what, on a more specific level, if I'm here or there, what might that look like? And then the care team can help with the next stage, which for a lot of people will be to help find a provider. Now, some people might not need that. As I say, if they're just early in that conversation and they want some advice or some guidance, then of course they don't need to find a provider. But if someone has come and said, right, I'm looking for IVF in London, then we are able to help link with a clinic, because we have a comprehensive clinic database across every single country that we're live in. So, for example, someone might say, right, I'm looking for IVF. I would like it to be in London. I would like to see a female doctor, and I would like them to be LGBTQ friendly, and I'd like them to have a specialism in endometriosis. And our care team will be able to come back and say, right, here are 4 clinics or however many that match that description. We don't receive any kickbacks from any of our clinics because we want to make sure that we are providing a resource that is non-biased and people are going to the clinic that's best matched for them. So you might then provide that employee with these 4 different options, and you might talk through and think, okay, well, this one, might look at location basis, or you might think, well, one's a really large clinic. Would I rather go to a really large clinic or a really small clinic? And we can help facilitate that decision making and then help you with booking the first appointment as well. The thing that's really great is that the access to the appointments with our care team are unlimited. So if after you've had a consultation, you're a bit overwhelmed, you're a bit confused, or if you want a bit more information, you can click back through, book an appointment with our care team and talk things through with them as well. So they are there to support you from the beginning to the end of your journey. And once you've found your provider, if your company is, one quick thing, for those individuals who might not be looking for full treatment, as I say, if you're earlier in those stages or you're looking for something perhaps a bit more diagnostic, we also offer a sort of marketplace on our platform where you can purchase additional testing. So be that fertility testing, sort of sperm testing. Within the UK, our menopause offering is available through the marketplace as well, or a relatively recent partnership, which is with Clue, who are a period tracking app. You can access that through the marketplace, and there are always discounts on there. And as I've said, in terms of having a recent partnership with Clue, we're always adding to that marketplace to make sure there are relevant things for people to access. And as I say, if you are looking for something before a full fertility treatment, this might be the place that an individual would start. And then if you're lucky enough to have an employer who is putting aside a budget for you, who can help support you from a financial perspective, the claims submission is really straightforward. One thing I love about the Apryl platform is it's incredibly user-friendly. It's not just designed for people who can code and know how to work very complex systems. It's really straightforward. You can go in, you can upload your documents and request reimbursement, and those will be processed very quickly. So they'll be processed either in this month's payroll or the next month's payroll, depending obviously when your cutoff is. Now, each individual would have a budget as determined by their company. So some companies we work with go for what we call our standard model and don't provide a budget for employees. And some companies that we work with have deeper pockets than others. And the biggest budget we actually have is a €30,000 budget per employee. So depending on what that budget looks like, you can see what your budget is, you can see where your claims are at and what status they're in, and you can see how much you've got left available to spend. From the perspective of obviously, if we have, say you're in the UK and there are national health options, we would always recommend exploring those first, because we want to preserve the budget, because unfortunately you never know how many rounds of treatment people are going to need. But we would always walk through this with you at the care team consultation, so they would be able to support you with that decision making in terms of, right, is time on your side? Do you have the time to wait for an NHS appointment? If not, what are our options? So the care team are there to support you through how to best preserve and use your budget, and also what those options are. As I say, really simple reimbursement process where you would be paid out within your next payroll. From an employer perspective, so the employers, the question is always, why is this an employer's business, really? And Carl actually said this earlier. If you think of 5 or 10 years ago, this probably wasn't something that employers got involved in. But that was definitely also the case with, mental health and financial support and all of these benefits that people have now come to expect. So particularly the younger generations, if you look at millennials and then the generations coming in below that, sort of your Gen Alphas, they consider fertility benefits to be a core part of health coverage. And 68% of people would change jobs to ensure fertility coverage. So it is becoming a very sort of hot topic. It's becoming talked about more and more. I mean, the statistics in terms of fertility benefits being mentioned in job adverts is immense. And we know that keeping and attracting the best people is really, really tough. On top of that, if you can support your employees through difficult life stages and difficult challenges, it is the right thing to do as well. So there's the moral standpoint. But at Apryl, we are here from an employer perspective to help with your employee productivity and motivation, your retention and loyalty, employer branding and recruiting, and then working with those sort of EDI metrics as well. So we've come recently to the end of Pride Month. You see loads of companies changing their logos to rainbow flags. And sometimes it's a question of, right, okay, but what are you really doing to support your LGBTQ employees, or what are you doing to support your employees going through these challenges? And what I love about April is that it's something tangible where you can say, this is what we're doing and this is how we are supporting your teams. Oh, I've been in this room too long and the light has just gone off. So you're going to have dimly lit Sarah for the rest of this. As I mentioned, there are a few different versions of our packages, best sort of tailorable to whatever it is that you need, whether that is a light version, which gives a real basic touch point for introducing fertility benefits into the workspace, the standard version, which is all the support except the financial, or the pro version, which allows people to claim for their particular treatment up to their lifetime fertility budget. And as I say, when we are working with a new employer, it's really important that we collaborate with them and talk to them about what their specific needs are so that we can really understand what the best package is for them, and really roll that out with them. So as I sort of touched on, we know that the focus has really shifted from just, if you think of generations before us, people took jobs and they stayed there for a really long time, and they didn't expect their employer to be involved in employee assistance programs or fertility or anything like that. But now people want more from their employers, and this is a great way of retaining and attracting those incredible people. So I think that's kind of everything on that whistle-stop tour of what we do at April. But I would love to answer some more questions and perhaps get into a bit of a deeper dive as to what we can do at April and how we can support individuals and employers.
Amazing. Thank you, Sarah. And I couldn't agree more around the demands the employees are placing on employers now in terms of the support that they require, and it's a huge attraction and retention piece. I think that companies are increasingly acknowledging that they need to address in terms of the support across the diverse needs of the workforce. And this piece to me around fertility, that there isn't anything that matters more to those people, than the support they get through fertility in whatever form that takes. It's the most important thing in the world to them is that, having that child. So I think, when we talk about moments that matter, there's not a more significant moment that matters to me, when it comes to these things. A couple of questions from me and sort of thoughts from me, I guess. I've seen throughout my career a lot, increasingly larger companies that have the luxury of operating healthcare trusts actually put funds in through medical insurance to support IVF, IUI, whatever it may be, and put a budget in there, a lifetime sort of budget. Still very much like even for companies that are doing that or have a budget externally, operating and providing your services still really can complement those budgets and those access points that may already exist because of probably the nature, I assume, of the complexity of this marketplace in the UK and globally, and actually getting the right clinical outcomes.
100%. So that's kind of why I touched on the whole importance of the preservation of the budget, because say, for example, certain areas in the UK, you might be able to access NHS funding for something, or you might have some healthcare provision that will cover some parts of it. We always look at what's your plan A, plan B, plan C to go through those processes. And like you say, if someone's part of a healthcare trust, they might have some cover towards something, but it might not be full. And in terms of that equity piece for people to all be able to access as much as possible. I actually was on a sales call with someone the other day who said that she had IVF and she started the process living in one area and moved midway through and completed her first cycle and found then that the area she used to live in, she would have been eligible for 3 fully funded cycles. And the area she'd moved into, she was only eligible for 2 fully funded cycles. And she said, I probably wouldn't have moved if I'd have known that. So it's really important that we look at exactly what the funding options are, and the care team are there to support anyone through that journey.
Cool. Yeah. And I know the NHS, obviously, like you say, has a bit of a postcode lottery, isn't it, in terms of how much support you can get. Your platform can help people understand what that looks like locally.
Less so physically on the platform. That would more be a conversation that we would have. And again, also with the NHS, sometimes it's about timing as well. Because, if someone comes and says, I'm 42, I'd like to start trying for IVF, you don't have the luxury of time. So it really, we're always there to look out for the best for the individual. But as I say, often the best is attempting to preserve that budget in order to ensure that the person has access to the full budget as and when they need it.
Yeah, which kind of leads me on to my next point, really, which is I know that the NHS does place restrictions around access. So age, I think you have to been trying for 2 years, I think, in things like that, which does, which doesn't help people that are trying to start a family on their own, those sorts of things. And then I think there's also some requirements around, like, if you've got a high BMI and things like that.
All sorts of things. I mean, I didn't know this until just before I started working for April. One of my close friends has a stepson. And so her husband had already had a child, which meant she, in our area, was not eligible for IVF, despite meeting all the other criteria. So it is a bit of a nightmare. And again, we are really there to help navigate that, both from an emotional standpoint, because it's really a really challenging thing to go through emotionally, but also from a logistical standpoint as well.
So there's no restrictions really, other than the obvious that you guys place on anyone that's seeking your support.
So we don't place any restrictions, but again, any new employer we start working with, we have a no contract, and we also have something called a statement of work, in which we outline exactly what the restrictions are, all of which are given to the care team and to the individuals, so that we can make sure that before anyone goes on any journey, they know exactly what they're eligible for. So a really basic example of that might be, do you want to give your employees access to their budget, on day one of employment, or do you want to wait until they've passed their probation or they've been there for 6 months? We would get all of that written out, and the care team would then be able to have that in front of them, so that when they are discussing with a employee, they can know exactly what's eligible and what isn't. So again, it's up to a company as to whether they want to allow treatments in different countries, or whatever those specifications look like. We always encourage people to try and be as broad as possible and place as few restrictions as possible for the sake of the employee. But fundamentally, it does come down to what the employer wants in that plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Right, let's move on to some questions, shall we? We've got a few filtering through. So the first one, so do global companies usually have the same budget across different countries, or do they change them for each country depending on what the cost framework looks like in each country?
So that's a kind of an interesting point, because it really depends, again, down to the employer as to what they want to do. So if they said, right, we want to have a blanket approach because it's easier for us, and we want to put, and I'm going to pick a random number, but say €5,000 towards all of our employees because that is equal, that's what we will do. And we're happy to roll that out. But particularly for very global countries, companies, if there are, for example, if you're thinking budget-wise, if they've got a population in Canada and they've got a population in India. In Canada, one round of IVF costs on average €11,000. And in India, one round of IVF costs on average €2,000. So if you offer everyone €5,000, it's not a very equitable budget. It's an equal budget, but it doesn't provide the same amount of treatment for people. So what we tend to do is sort of split countries into buckets as to where costs are similar. Now, we use IVF as the benchmark because that is one of the more expensive treatments, and it's also, one of our more common treatments as well. So it's kind of indicative of what other prices look like. Now, obviously, if someone's going for international adoption, that's going to be very, very expensive. But we look at sort of rounds of IVF as a really good marker, and we would then segment them into, say, 4 different sections of, right, for these countries, we give this budget, for these we give this, and for the etc. But as I say, that is kind of also up to the employer. If they do decide, actually, it's easier for us to give everyone a flat budget, we are able and happy to do that as well.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. That's very clear. So we've got a really interesting question here from Martin. So thinking of the abortion political landscape in the US, is it clear which of the providers that track fertility, ovulation cycles, etc., share user data, or do April only work with those that don't?
This is such an important question. So thank you for that, Martin. Yes, we work with Clue as the provider that we use for fertility tracking. And one of the reasons we work with them, aside from it also being, a female-founded company and sort of aligned with our values as a company, but they never ever share any user data. And that's why they are someone that we would always try to work with, because the sort of data point is very important to us as well.
Awesome. A question here from Kirsty. So please could you provide more detail on how claims against a lifetime allowance are validated? So what happens if someone submits a claim that's rejected, for example?
So essentially, it doesn't happen very often, because in order to submit a claim, you have to have spoken to our care team. So all of those eligibility criteria will have been talked about. But if, for example, you're submitting a claim whereby maybe you've gone to pick up, I don't know, some progesterone at a pharmacy, and at the same time you've bought some razors and you've submitted a claim, but you've forgotten to take the razors off the cost. Obviously, we're not going to reimburse you for your razors. So the care team would just go back, reject the claim with missing information, or if it had the wrong thing on it, go back and send an email over and say, this has been rejected because of X, Y, and Z. And then they would need to re-upload it with the missing information or whatever that looks like. As I say, it doesn't really happen very often because of the conversations that happen with the care team first. But if it's something like we can't read the receipt, what I love is it's done by humans. So they just get back in touch and say, we can't read the receipt. Could you upload a clearer image, or whatever that looks like? It's sort of a back and forth process. But normally, generally speaking, they simply upload the receipt, put a bit of information about it, and it would get validated. And then you can also track the status of a claim through the platform, so you can see where it's at and how long it will take to be paid out, or what paycheck it'll be in.
Awesome. Okay. And then another question here from Jasmine. So there's always a tax question, Sarah. You'll learn this the next time you come on. There's always a tax question. What are the tax implications for UK employees if an employer gives an employee an allowance, for example? Is it P11D? Is it a benefit in kind and therefore subject to P11D?
So what I would always caveat this with is I am not a tax advisor. We would always recommend speaking to your tax advisors when looking at everything like this. But it is considered a P11D benefit, and there are also lots of ways of, generally speaking, deciding whether or not you want to give it as a net benefit or a gross benefit. And as I say, that's something we would get into at that statement of work stage. But we would also always recommend speaking to a tax advisor if you're looking at making those really individual nitty-gritty tax-based decisions. Excellent.
Okay, cool. So what would your advice be then in terms of best practices for companies that are just starting out on this journey, in terms of implementing fertility benefits, in terms of comms, what's the first step, Sarah?
So this is something I feel really passionately about, actually, is that it's always really great to have great benefits, but if people don't know about them, they are a little bit pointless. So what I would say is we are very keen at Apryl to be involved in that implementation and that rollout phase. So if you want us to do a webinar about infertility or about LGBTQ parenting or whatever it looks like in order to raise awareness, if you want us to come and talk at your wellness week or have a stand or put out some digital comms or whatever that looks like, we love to work with employers to put that out there and to really shout about the amazing benefits that they're offering, because as I say, it's no good having great benefits that people don't know about. So from the practical implementation side, there's all of the behind the scenes stuff, but from implementing across your workforce, we're really keen to get involved with that. Putting it out in, one email is really useful and people might see it, but actually if we can say, here's an email and here's a webinar that we're then also going to record that you can listen to, and that might get people talking, might spark a conversation. That is always our best practice, is sort of kind of shout about it a bit and let us shout about it for you.
Yeah. And of course, housing all of your benefits on a platform like Ben, everything's centralized, everyone knows where to go. Benefits don't need to be hidden. They can be centralized in one place. I had to get that in there. So,
absolutely. No, of course.
Right, yeah. My obligation. Look, we've answered all the questions. Thanks ever so much to those that have asked questions today. They were really insightful, and thanks, Sarah, for answering those in such a concise and articulate way. I think we can close the webinar now. Thanks thanks ever so much to everyone who's joined. Again, super special thanks to Sarah. That was really, really interesting. I absolutely believe this is a huge area, and is only going to grow significantly as more employers step into this space in terms of supporting their employees. If you want to reach out to April, feel free to do that directly. If you want to come via us, then we can put you in contact with April as well. Again, thanks everyone, and we'll speak to you next time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Cheers.